The Alliance, proudly brought to you by Visi. Packaging for the food and beverage industries to keep our supermarkets open.
For more than 100 years, Australia and the United States have fought alongside one another. Brothers in arms since World War I, our nations share a great deal more than the white stars proudly stitched on our national flags. We might be separated by the world's largest ocean, but there's so much that brings us together. From sport...
I encourage it. I like to see it.
...to entertainment. In episode 6, we take a look at why we are such great mates, the culture and values that we share, which build on the powerful partnership that is the Alliance. It was a chilly start to autumn here in San Francisco on the 1st of September 1951. Yet on that special day, relations between American and Australian diplomats couldn't have been warmer. Here at the Presidio, an 18th century Spanish fort and headquarters to the US 6th Army, the delegation of ambassadors and secretaries of state signed the ANZUS Treaty. Australia's signatory, Percy Spender, Australia's ambassador to the United States and unstoppable force behind the alliance. For Spender, it was the first step in building the ramparts of freedom in the vast and increasingly important area of the Pacific Ocean. Initially a military alliance, the relationship has become so much more. Former US Ambassador to Australia, Jeff Bleich, certainly sees it that way.
The relationships moved from a purely military one. And so when we had an alliance formed, it was really not the beginning of a relationship, but I think an affirmation of the depth of our relationship. We were marrying our fortunes together. And once you form a good marriage, you find that a lot of other wonderful things happen that you never imagined. And that's who America and Australia have been.
For our own former ambassador, Joe Hockey, it's been a marriage between mates.
When I came here, I started to feel that we'd been in a long marriage with the United States, but we needed something new to talk about. And mateship was an incredible platform for us to remind each other of how much we do for each other on a daily basis.
This mateship reflects our shared optimism and our common vision of a bright future.
As ambassador, Joe Hockey launched a mateship campaign that brought to life just how much we Australians and Americans have in common, from a love of wine to sport. And it started with our remarkable shared history.
I think one of the most brilliant campaigns your most recent ambassador, Joe Hockey, did in inventing a campaign called Mateship, was able to use that to touchstone those values and the history of the relationship. He went back to its beginning at Hamel, where U.S. troops under the command of General Sir John Monash broke open the Western Front in, I think, less than 93 minutes. And it was a start of a great relationship between Australia and America. And it's one that my father continued in World War II. And while I was in Australia as the U.S. ambassador there, I would regularly visit sites that my father, after surviving the Battle of Guadalcanal with the 1st Marine Division, would visit when he stayed in Melbourne. You know, they put the Marines up in tents on the Melbourne cricket ground. And that sacred soil is sacred not only to Australia but to the United States because they protected our troops there during the war.
Hundreds of thousands of American troops were stationed here in World War II. And the US soldiers didn't just bring military might, they also brought with them a new culture of consumerism. From Coca-Cola to coffee, hamburgers, hot dogs, even sliced bread, American fashion and consumerism had a massive influence here. And by 1944, 2/3 of Australian imports came from the USA. But the cultural exchange wasn't all one way.
My dad said when they left Guadalcanal, they wondered if there was any good left in the world. And they arrived in Melbourne Harbor, and a little band on the pier struck up the tune Waltzing Matilda. Well, my dad said there wasn't a dry eye on the boat, not to be admitted. But They were so moved by that moment that to this very day, the fight song of the United States Marine Corps' 1st Division is, and has been for 73 years, Waltzing Matilda.
These days, Australia's efforts to have a real cultural impact on America take place on Australia Day, when we say, "G'day, USA."
Five Australian governments got their act together, and we're joined by Rupert Murdoch, Peter Lowy, Dick Pratt, Penfolds and many, many others to present the first Australia Week in the United States.
Just bringing a spotlight to us around the world.
The Australian Open was the only place that I was ever defaulted in a match.
Thank you, Australia, and thank you, America, the two greatest countries on earth.
It all started back in 2004 with Australia's Consul General in LA, John Olsen, who recognised the need to get on the front foot and assert our Aussie identity.
I was struck by the fact that they didn't understand that Australia was a modern, sophisticated country that was a leader in the Asia-Pacific region.
John Olsen's plans for G'day USA were initially born of frustration.
It was firstly the lack of recognition of the Holden Monaro as the Pontiac GTO as an Australian product. After I arrived, the Holden Monaro was exported to the United States by General Motors. They rebadged it the Pontiac GTO. Now this was designed and engineered in Melbourne, manufactured in Adelaide, supported by the Commonwealth, Victorian and South Australian government financially. And what annoyed me was our involvement in design, engineer and manufacturing wasn't acknowledged in that product entering the US marketplace. And once again, it was one of the reasons that G'day USA was established to say, look at the products that we produce in Australia.
A clumsy celebration of our National Day was the breaking point.
It was sponsored by Air New Zealand. We sang the New Zealand national anthem. And after that, I said, no self-respecting Australian should have this repeat. And with Qantas and Tourism Australia and Austrade and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, which is Consul General represented, we put together a committee. And that committee looked at how do we market Australia to this mass consumer market, the United States. And the first person I spoke to in building this, to underwrite this program, was Rupert Murdoch. And Rupert indicated to me that he would support our endeavour to market Australia to this mass consumer market, the United States. And I was really grateful because once Rupert had stumped up money for the program, then other corporations followed suit.
G'day USA has gone from strength to strength, driven by the quality of our brands and the men and women who best represent our national character. A unique blend of stardust, laid-back Aussie charm and larrikin humour.
Australians are at their very best when we are what we are. You know, we're respectful, but we're not pretentious. We're mindful of tradition, but we're not beholden to it. Americans love that. I mean, Americans genuinely love Australians, not only for who we are, but what we represent. So just being yourself with Americans is so refreshing for them because they live in this is a pretty hierarchical society. And in terms of where they are in the world, they are the most powerful country in the world. We're in the most powerful city in the world, and just down the road here is the most powerful human being in the world. You've got to respect that, but also not give up who you are. And Australians never give up who they are, and that's why Americans really like us.
Perhaps that's one reason why we seem to play a lot of golf together.
Golf has been the distraction or hobby of many US presidents. I've been involved in a golf club here where Eisenhower apparently used to go every afternoon, and they even set up an office room in the golf club.
I think there has been 16 presidents out of 45 who have played golf. So that's 1/3 of the people, the men who've sat in the White House, have enjoyed the sport. I think it's a fantastic opportunity to release a lot of the stress of what's been going on. God only knows what these presidents have done, 45 of them, right? What's on their shoulders on a day-to-day basis. I've played with quite a few of them, I shouldn't say quite a few of the 16, but maybe I have. I played like a third of the 16. And I think President Bush 41 was a guy who played the fastest golf. He would want to play in less than 90 minutes, 18 holes, and if you didn't keep up with him, he would leave you behind. So he just wanted to get out there, get playing, and go. So, you know, from my perspective, I encourage it. I like to see it.
President Trump's passion for golf brought him into the same circle as our very own shark, Greg Norman.
Just before I was received by President Trump, he'd had a message from Greg Norman, and he mentioned that to me, and that was just a reminder of how personal the relationships have become. Those relationships are important.
In fact, it was Greg Norman who helped sort the diplomatic row over President Obama's refugee deal when the newly elected President Trump first took office.
You know, Donald Trump disrupted from day one, and there was no normal administration or transition into the administration. And it was pretty clear that the people that I'd been dealing with in the transition team weren't on top of things. And look, you've got to be innovative. You know, Greg Norman's a friend of mine. I knew that he'd played golf with Donald Trump. It was a phone call to Greg, and I said, do you have Donald Trump's phone number? And he said, try this. And I rang Malcolm Turnbull and said, give this a shot, and it worked. But, you know, that's just the art of diplomacy, or the art of just...
The deal.
The deal, yes, the deal. That's right.
Coming up, there's no business like show business. From stage to screen, the soft power of the entertainment industry.
At Verizon, we keep companies ready for what's next. When it comes to digital transformation, we're here and we're ready. The Alliance is brought to you by Verizon.
This program is brought to you by Lockheed Martin Australia. Your mission is ours.
Play it, Sam.
You must remember this. A kiss is just a kiss.
From the charismatic charm of Casablanca to the introduction of colour in The Wizard of Oz.
Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
Even before the US-Australia alliance was formed, the influence of Hollywood on our culture was all-powerful.
You can't underestimate the impact of Hollywood. The reason we think diamond rings are worthwhile, the reasons we all started smoking and then why we stopped smoking. So its cultural reach is phenomenal.
The star power of Hollywood lures customers and lifts business. Look no further than our flagship airline Qantas, who brought John Travolta on board.
We're starting the world tour for Qantas, the Friendship Tour.
In 2002, after the horror of 9/11, John Travolta, a pilot in his own right, became a Qantas ambassador to encourage people to travel again. He even bought an ex-Qantas Boeing 707. And who could forget that Travolta's Sandra Dee in the rock and roll movie Grease was our very own Liv.
Sandy? Tell me about it, Stir.
The fact is that Australia has long punched above its weight in Hollywood.
It's Errol Flynn in his greatest role.
When people forget, people like Errol Flynn and Merle Oberon, you know, and they became massive stars. And it continued with, as I say, people like Mel Gibson, and you can't forget Mr. Hogan, through to the current day when there is just Hollywood and New York are awash with Australian faces and talent.
Talent that seems to be able to win Oscars.
Oscars, Emmys.
It's a little bit like the gold medals at the Olympics. If you looked on a per capita basis for who gets Academy Awards and Academy Award nominations, I think Australia would win again. The other thing about it is that it extends the soft power of both of our nations. People come to know us through our films. They come to know us through our actors and singers and celebrities. And there's a great appreciation, and these common reference points is more important than all the battles that we fought together to keep our nation safe, in terms of letting the world know who we are, what we value, and that we care about them.
It was a bloke whose job it was to paint the Sydney Harbour Bridge who became Australia's biggest cultural drawcard.
That's not a knife. That's a knife.
Unfortunately, a lot of Americans particularly weren't as so sure or knowing very much about us, so I think some of them thought it was a documentary. So, but then again, what was phenomenal off that was the tourism ads that he also went on to do. Of course, the famous, you know, putting shrimps on the barbie, when of course that isn't actually what we'd even say, but you know, that was done deliberately for the American audience, and it worked.
Hollywood embraced Hoag's, even inviting him to speak at the Oscars, which he did, unscripted.
Don't be too humble tonight, because we have up here a second envelope. So don't get up on the stage and say, I don't deserve this award. If you really feel you don't deserve an Academy Award, just give us a wave from your seat.
Such is the power of Dundee that in 2018, Tourism Australia used a Super Bowl ad to promote a new movie disguised as an ad for Australia.
So tourism had spoken to us and to Paul Hogan. He and I agreed that we would make it look like it was a film that we were backing for them. And cutting forward, of course, now Australian tourism uses Chris Hemsworth. So again, it's that interlink of our stars to help the country in other ways.
In all the rich cross-fertilisation of movie-making and entertainment between America and Australia, what no one was prepared for was COVID-19. Here, Australia, through both luck and good management, has been something of a bright light. It's late July and day one on the shoot of Ruby's Choice, with Jane Seymour in the title role and directed by Australian Michael Budd. Jane Seymour, known to many as having revived the Western with Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman, is over here from Los Angeles. Jane, not much going on in California?
No, not much. I think there are a few soap operas that are being done. But, you know, my agent told me that literally at his agency I was the only person working, which I thought was kind of wonderful for a woman of a certain age.
The thing about our Australian crews is that we're very resilient. We want to work, and we listen to New South Wales Health and the guidelines that are put out to us, and we follow them.
This is seamless here. I mean, everyone here is a pro, and I'm just incredibly grateful that the government let me in to come and do this movie.
We've got dramas filming in most places again. We still have shows that are going in Melbourne. So that's incredible. Baz Luhrmann is looking to have Elvis back on set on the Gold Coast imminently. The inquiries that are coming in from the studios are non-stop. You know, how do we come down? How do we film there? Because it's safe. They know we've got brilliant crew and facilities, so we're a perfect home.
Even before COVID hit, Australia had built a reputation as a can-do place to film, with a vast range of locations and tax incentives, from location offsets to post-digital special effects. So what do Americans think of us?
The industry think we're incredibly hardworking, that we come up with solutions to problems before they even happen. So that's what producers normally say to me. And I think, again, in the cultural exchange, people think we're easygoing and easy to work with.
In late January, just before the pandemic hit and the lights went out on Broadway, we were in New York. You know Broadway when you see it, and shows that have been successful here in New York, like West Side Story and The Lion King, have come on to Australia. And of course, the sellout show, Hamilton, here in New York, is coming to our shores next year. Hamilton has been a sellout in the US, the story of an orphan who goes to America and rises up to be Treasury Secretary and George Washington's right-hand man. Hamilton's journey to Australia began 5 years ago with a visit to Broadway by Aussie producer Michael Castle.
I deliberately didn't read anything about Alexander Hamilton. I thought I just want to see how my experience is in that theatre and what I learn about the story. And I walked into that theatre, the Richard Rogers Theatre, and 2.5 hours later walked out having drunk the Kool-Aid and thought, wow, this is amazing, and I again want to be a part of it when it comes to Australia. The way it fuses rap, hip-hop, jazz, Broadway show tunes, the diversity of that musical score is incredible.
It is through rap, such a powerful communicator in black American culture, that Hamilton's composer and writer, Lin-Manuel Miranda, who also took the lead role, tells the story.
Lin-Manuel Miranda has described, you know, rap is the storytelling of revolutions. You know, it's making that argument, it's fighting that fight, and you know that's why he chose rap to tell, you know, the story of Hamilton.
Australian film director Michael Budd is also a rap artist.
Hamilton, I mean, is just a wonderful, marvellous stage play. It's got importance of culture, it's got importance of history, and it touches a wide audience because it can touch a common person to the street right up to the top at a CEO level. So I think it speaks to all. So I'm very excited about it, and I can't wait for it to arrive here.
In New York, on one of the last show nights before the shutdown, I spoke with two rather special members of the Hamilton cast. Aussies, Kim Taylor and Robert Walters.
It's amazing. Coming from Australia, I'm from West Pymble in Sydney. I started dancing when I was young, but you kind of always have this dream in the back of your head that you want to get to West End or you want to get to Broadway, but you kind of never quite think it's going to happen.
So the exciting thing is for Australians that Hamilton is actually going to come to Australia next year. Now, it's a lot of American history. How do you think it's going to resonate down there, Kim?
It's a story about an underdog coming up to make a name for himself and provide for his family and make a legacy to leave behind.
So you think that'll resonate with Aussies?
Oh, of course. Aussie battler.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot of just basic human emotion that translate no matter where you're from. Yeah. Even though it's definitely an American story, I think it doesn't really matter where you're from. You can take away a human experience.
I think you look at kind of the foundations of our two nations. You look at the pioneering spirit of those characters that kind of gave birth to our countries. You look at the democracy and the shared values that we have, the shared spirit. I think, you know, that's why the two nations have always been great mates.
Hamilton's opening night will be here at the Lyric Theatre in March. But as an Australian, you can already see Hamilton because it's streaming now on Disney+. In fact, the giant US streaming services like Amazon and Netflix and HBO are shaking up the entertainment business, and they bring both an opportunity and a threat to our culture. In part, streaming has arrived with new technology, but it's also a profound shift in entertainment. Movies are being overtaken by high-quality series for the small screen. The Godfather and Goodfellas are now The Sopranos. Sir Colin Callender is the producer behind Broadway's production of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. A former HBO executive, he helped shift the balance of power to the small screen with shows like John Adams and Empire Falls.
The way in which stories that we tell on stage or on screen shape culture, I think is something really important to explore and discuss. Martin Scorsese wrote a big op-ed, a big opinion piece about all the big sort of comic book movies that have been made, and he was really saying that he felt that movies coming from Hollywood anyway culturally were no longer relevant in the way that they were in his day, and I think there's some truth to that. So I think that movies have a very important role to play in shaping the way we see the world. In fact, what's happened certainly in America, and I think to some extent in Australia, but certainly in America, is that television has taken over that role, filling the gap that movies had left, and that we saw television as a venue to explore the world around us in a way that movies had had abandoned.
For all the upside, producers like Sir Colin Callender say streaming is a threat to the national culture, and Australia needs to respond.
These new streaming services, Netflix and Amazon and so on, what's significant about them is that they are the first global networks. They are producing programming for a global market. And there's a growing danger that what they will do is buy up local Australian and British talent and put them on sort of very high-paying sort of retainer deals that will mean that the local networks in England and Australia won't actually be able to afford that talent anymore. So I think there is a need for there to be legislation to protect the domestic market from the checkbooks of those big guys who I think actually could begin to rape and pillage locally in a way that will actually hurt local production.
We need to look at Australian quota content for these streaming giants that are coming here to show TV shows. We need to have legislation that shows Australian content minimum quotas on screen, so Australian stories are being told all the time. So that's of utmost importance, and that's something that I'd like to stress.
Coming up, respect and rivalry. How sporting competition brings our nations closer together.
The Alliance is brought to you by Austal, Australia's global shipbuilder. The Alliance is brought to you by Hancock Prospecting, mates, business partners and allies.
From the excitement of team sports like basketball to individual pursuits like tennis and golf, one bit of culture that unites both the US and Australia is a love of sport.
A culture is defined by the stories you tell. And so in any context, when you meet colleagues, friends or counterparts from the United States, a common ground is the sharing of sport. Sporting anecdotes exist for a reason because they're something that people can anchor to and understand easily. It helps to bridge that divide. And so for us, when you talk about the cultural similarities, it's a great bridge between the United States and Australia across many facets of society.
The mateship and respect that we have for each other as nations also generates a healthy rivalry, and all the more in individual sports.
I think Australians and Americans particularly identify with the individual sports. Some of the best known American sports figures in Australia have been their swimmers and their golfers and their tennis players, or the individual sports.
Golf Hall of Famer Greg Norman, better known as the Shark, understands this well. His 331 weeks at the top of his game, only bettered by Tiger Woods in Alliance history, is a remarkable achievement.
Yeah, Australia, for a small nation of 25 million people today, has always produced high-quality golfers, male and female, consistently ranking #1 over decades and decades.
For our most famous golfer, the greatest sporting rivalry between Australia and America began not on the green, but in the water.
Yeah, I think the greatest rivalry between Australia and the US in sport would have been the America's Cup. America dominated sailing for, I think, 132 years, something like that, and a gentleman called Alan Bond in Australia, who was a guy from Western Australia. He was in the mining business, I believe, and he finally won the America's Cup away from America. The rivalry was there not just between the sailors and the boats and money to build all this, but the rivalry was there with technology.
And this is what won it for Australia too. The monster, as the Bond syndicate called the bulbous winged keel that made the West Australian 12-metre so competitive upwind and uncatchable downwind.
And Australia came out with a cutting-edge keel, which they had hidden from the Americans as they prepared and as they raced. They covered up the bottom of the boat, the hull of the boat, every time it got lifted out of the water. But it was technology that the Australians came up with that really blew the Americans out of the water. So when Australia finally won the America's Cup, boom.
I tell you what, any boss who sacks anyone for not turning up today is a bum.
America's Cup now is a highly competitive event on the calendar, the sailing calendar. So that would be one of the biggest rivalries that comes popping into my mind. I would say between those two, jumping off the page out of my head, would be sailing and golf. Then you got to think about, in recent times, the Australians who have broken into the NBA, the Australians who have broken into the NFL, No doubt in soccer as well, athletics and swimming. Australia, again, being a small nation, produces a plethora of really high-quality athletes.
Athletes like Mac Horton, Australia's 400-metre freestyle Olympic gold medalist, has thrived on the intense competition between Australia and America in the pool.
Australia and America are probably two of the strongest swimming nations, particularly if you go back, I get probably a few generations of swimming. They were the two standout nations. Now everyone else is kind of catching up. But yeah, the history of the rivalry is definitely there.
Whether it's the unforgettable Munich Summer Olympics in 1972, where American Mark Spitz and Australia's Shane Gould dominated the pool, or epic rivalry between Ian Thorpe and Michael Phelps, or more recent duels.
Titmus, the 18-year-old Australian, is storming home, and this is going to be an almighty upset. Titmus will take the gold medal. Ledecky the silver. An amazing result.
The closeness between the two teams adds to the drama.
I have a few good American swimming friends, mostly that I've met doing World Cup sort of events where you kind of tour around different countries and do a lot of racing. It probably does intensify the rivalry, I think, but also probably makes it more enjoyable because you're able to get out of the pool and just chat to them like we're mates again. It'd be no fun if it was hostile.
Just as in Hollywood, Australia punches above its weight as a sporting nation, but it relies heavily on funding to do so.
We do ridiculously well per capita, I guess, in the pool. And funding is very important to that because it sets up, I guess, the systems and the networks behind all the swimmers and supports them, I guess, from a younger age as well. That's what's really critical in swimming in Australia, picking up people from a younger age and being able to do that with the funding.
Vital dollars don't just come from government. Private business and individuals play a big role.
It's great to have Hancock Prospecting and Mrs. Reinhardt on board. Obviously, they offer a lot of support to Australian swimmers, not also rowers, synchronised swimmers and volleyball players. But beyond that, Mrs. Reinhardt has a personal interest in everyone on the team. There's nothing she loves more than just sitting down and chatting with the swimmers. She's always at swimming meets, very proud to, I guess, be associated with us, which is a privilege for us. So yeah, it's great to have her on board and to have been able to get to know her. She just loves to hear everyone's stories, how they've got to where they are.
For the first time since the Second World War, the Olympic Games have been put on hold. There's still hope that the Tokyo Olympics will go ahead next year.
Everyone's pretty dead set on the Olympics going ahead next year. It's obviously going to be a very different Olympics to what we're used to in terms of crowds and support, probably quarantining, etc., going into the country and obviously coming home as well.
For all sports hit by the pandemic, sports institutions can only do their best.
Golf's done a phenomenal job of implementing a modified bubble. It's not a bubble, it's a modified bubble. And really the onus is on the players of every sport, because the institutions, whether it's the PGA Tour, whether it's the NFL, whether it's the NBA, whether it's the Australian Cricket Board, or whatever, they can institute guidelines from the locker room to the field, but when the guys leave the locker room and leave that field and go home, what are they doing? And it's that modified bubble. It's what happens beyond what the institutions could do and implement is what the big concern is.
As fans, we know there's nothing like the thrill of watching sport live from the bleachers. But new technology means there is a chance that people will still be able to get close to the action.
If I'm not able to go to the game, rather than watching it in 2D, I now have the opportunity to engage and immerse in that viewing experience in a very different way comparative to what I would have otherwise. All of these opportunities, all of these changes that will really transform the way that we consume sport and many other types of entertainment are powered by that new technology.
For Verizon, that technology is 5G. The American telco advertised their 5G offering at this year's Super Bowl. With more than 100 million people watching in America alone, NFL's Grand Final is still the biggest sports event in America each year. And the buzz around its advertising real estate is big business. Over $5 million for just 30 seconds.
Well, certainly for us, events such as the Super Bowl have become a great proving ground and a great opportunity to showcase new technologies such as 5G. You know, we talk a lot about 5G technology transforming the way we live, work and play. A great example of how that technology can transform an entire fan and player experience inside the stadium and outside the stadium. And so it becomes a great opportunity for us to build out and understand how that technology can change everything about the way that you consume that entertainment. From the way that you understand what's happening on the field with real-time player statistics and video angles streamed to your 5G device, to the way that the trainers can understand the telemetry of in real time of what the players are doing on the field, to the way that I might order food or concessions or engage in virtual reality or augmented reality fan experiences while I'm sitting there in the stadium.
So, when it comes to competitive footy codes, does American football really give us the biggest kick?
It's the greatest sporting event in the world. But you could say the similar about AFL here in Australia. And I think one of the great similarities between the US and Australia is that love of sport, that love of that large-scale entertainment.
Earlier this year, we were in Iowa on Super Bowl Sunday. And at a local bar in downtown Des Moines, a surprising admission from the sports fans watching the Chiefs take on the 49ers.
Not to sound blasphemous on Super Bowl Sunday, but now that I've been playing Aussie rules for about 10 years and you start watching a little bit more, I actually enjoy watching Aussie rules more than American football.
But then, these are no ordinary sports fans. This is the Des Moines Roosters, Iowa's All-American AFL side.
We are one of the only teams, maybe the only team without any Aussies, so that's a bit fun, and most of the teams we play are in a division or two ahead of us, so that's good for us because we get some good competition. Last year, actually, in the Nationals, we lost the grand final by less than a goal, so that was pretty heartbreaking, but it was good and gives us hope for next year.
Club president Nana Coleman agrees and believes the brand of mateship that exists in Aussie rules offers the code enormous growth potential.
For me, it's really the community and the camaraderie. Club sporting isn't really like a thing that we do here, right? I mean, you play sports, as a kid through your school is usually what it is, and then you might play club sports if you're sort of more competitive, but it's not accessible the way that footy is. And so there's a level of accessibility, there's a level of camaraderie, of connection that's just really awesome, that I love about the AFL experience here in the United States.
First time I saw it, I was still in the U.S. It was before I became an ambassador. But I remember being fascinated. It came on TV, and it looked kind of like a prison riot with a ball, and you can do anything with the ball. You can run with it, you can dribble, and you can pass, you can kick, tackle each other. I mean, it's like every sport altogether. But then once I really learned the sport, it's a beautiful sport.
Currently, there are more than 40 AFL sides playing competitively in the United States.
Here is Fleet. He's going to chip that one inside, going up high. Ball goes to ground. Crash, boom, opera in the pocket there.
And before COVID hit, there were plans for the GWS Giants to play in the US for points. Incredible news for this GWS fan.
If any AFL team came over to the U.S., I would definitely make a point to go see them. If GWS came, I would do anything possible to go see them. I think I'm one of the only Giants fans in America, probably the only one. I watch every game of theirs every week, lots of times getting up in the middle of the night to watch it live. I think having an AFL team come here and play a match, that definitely gain exposure to the sport. It's pretty fun. It'd just be good to have another opportunity to introduce them to AFL and what it is, and gain some exposure and hopefully some new fans and some new Roosters to come join us and play. There
is, however, one rather sensitive matter in our sporting relationship.
They don't know and understand cricket. That's a terrible failure on their part, but and they're not going to change.
Oh yes, no, they have no idea about cricket. They still think cricket is an insect. There's not much room for cricket.
For a nation that brought the Don, Donald Bradman, to the world, this is incomprehensible. A colonial departure. But then, to Americans, their footy, NFL, is equally sacred.
You know, as between football and cricket, you know, they both have their strengths. I've enjoyed both of them. They both have their limitations. To me, football has some of the worst aspects of American society. It's intense violence interrupted by committee meetings. And cricket, you know, it's a sport, but it's also, you know, it can go for 5 days. You have to take meal breaks, and there may not be any result at the end of it.
Yet, as we say, the alliance is bigger than presidents, and we should hail our sporting differences. Coming up, from Black Lives Matter to gun control, what the alliance partners learn from each other.
This program is proudly brought to you by Brickworks Building Products, inspiring the built environment with sustainable, beautiful products that last forever.
I'm Olivia Newton-John, and I'm here in beautiful New York City, and behind me, the world-famous Carnegie Hall. Today, America welcomed its new president, Barack Obama, and Australia has sent a gift of some of its most talented performers, just here to say, G'day, USA.
America's first black president was a coming of age in American culture.
You could see even people who didn't vote for Barack Obama having a pride about America, a sense that people thought we were too racist and we were too divided, we were too this or we were too that, to ever elect an African-American president. And he won convincingly all across America.
But the pressure to acknowledge racial inequality, America's history, exacerbated by the death of George Floyd, has created a new movement this year, Black Lives Matter. And across the Pacific, empathetic BLM protests in Australia, recognising our own inequalities.
The reason the problem keeps occurring is because we've never confronted the systemic racism, the aspects of our system that were always corrupted by this. And it's actually been an astonishingly positive movement here in the U.S. When you watch how people of all different races and backgrounds have been marching together peacefully, encouraging practical changes to make sure that, you know, it doesn't matter who you're born to or how you start out life, everyone in the United States should get a fair chance. It's what I said about Love in Australia, giving everyone a fair go.
In one battle for inclusion, America and Australia have led the world. Marriage rights came later, but Pride in San Francisco began in 1970, and the gay protest that led to the Sydney Mardi Gras in 1978. There is one issue, though, where many Americans and Australians part company, and it goes back to America's Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. If Donald Trump wins the election, it may in part be thanks to this American couple outside their home last month. But in Australia, one fateful mass shooting in 1996 at Port Arthur in Tasmania led the Prime Minister, John Howard, to bring in tough gun controls.
I thought that John Howard's move was a great example of leadership. As I said, 85% of Americans support those common sense changes, and yet our political system has made it difficult for those changes to happen. And I would often point out to Americans Australia's example, which was that you had mass shootings every year for, I believe, 16 years, up until that change after the Port Arthur shootings, and that there has not been a single, or maybe there's only been one in the past 24 years since.
As America and Australia pull through the pandemic and look to a recovery, there is one challenge they face together: our work culture, educating young people to be job ready. And here, the Alliance Partnership has created something quite different. Torrens is the first new university in Australia in 20 years, built from scratch with a big US backer.
The reason that we got the licence for the new university was because Laureate International Universities was the largest provider of higher education in the world. At that time, we owned over 59 universities, incredible, in about 30 different countries. And to bring that global muscle to Australia was really setting the stall to do something different. So Bill Clinton was our Chancellor. We had Condi Rice on our academic board. So we really were created on the shoulders of giants. And I think that attitude and that American culture of entrepreneurism and success and accountability, industry partnerships is really what we've brought to this university.
Australia's reputation as a powerhouse for education in Asia attracted the big American investor 7 years ago. This year, Torrens has been sold to another NASDAQ-listed American giant, Strategic Education, for $900 million.
When you think there's no buildings in that, that's all people power. It's incredible, and we are super excited about that because they're an amazing muscle in America. They've got Capella universities and Strayer universities, and I would hand on heart say they're the most technologically advanced university group in the world. And we want these smarts. We want these smarts for Asia Pacific.
Australia is known to produce very high quality graduates. There's a great deal of demand for Australian education. And so we're very excited to be coming into Australia as a partner there.
Based in Virginia, Carl McDonnell had a big business career before academia at Disney, Pepsi and Goldman Sachs.
The mission of our organization is focused on economic mobility, which is the thought that education should be the vehicle through which a person can get a better job, earn more over his or her lifetime. And so we very much like the fact that Torrens and the affiliated assets focus on that practical, relevant, employer-type skills that are in demand today.
Binding Torrens and Strategic Education is a shared view that students of the future need a new type of education to cope with our changing work culture. Online tech expertise, coding boot camps, and on campus, small groups replace lectures.
There's two people at the centre of our business. It's industry and it's students. We are absolutely loud and proud about being an access university. We really are about return on investment for students, for adults who want to get better jobs and better opportunities for their family.
I think the degree to which we can develop jointly a model of hybrid education, which is the blending of in-person instruction with online learning, to the degree that we could create a role model where students are being successful, where over time the cost of education is coming down, completion rates are going up, people are earning a high salary as a result of their education, but we hopefully are part of a solution both here in the United States as well as in Australia.
Torrens University has been growing by 27% during COVID as students reach out for skills to get back into the workforce. Industry-led education is proving popular.
You know, Torrens has just started, so I'm looking forward to seeing what this new alliance brings. The Smarts from America. We have a lot to add to this alliance as well, and I'm just looking forward to getting to 50,000 students graduating with an amazing job every year, 5 self-funding research centres, and some amazing alumni of Torrens University who are going to change the world.
Life has changed quite a bit since we set out to film the Alliance series 8 months ago. COVID has struck, relations with China are strained, and now the US election is in full swing. Our world is full of uncertainty. And yet, as we look to the future, there are perhaps 2 things we can be sure of. First, that we will face new threats to our security, prosperity and freedom. And second, that in taking on the challenges that lie ahead, we will do so in partnership with our great ally, the United States. That, after all, after 100 years of mateship, is why we have the Alliance.